All right, why don't we jump in? I know it's Monday, so everyone's pretty busy. So we'll just get started. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here today. My name is Chris Steinkamp. I'm the Executive Director at Mountain Towns 2030, and I really appreciate you being here today for this really valuable conversation. I'm really excited to have Matt Woods, the CEO of Destination Queenstown here. He's going to talk about their goal of decarbonizing the Queenstown Lake visitor economy by 2030. And for those of you who attended our recent climate summit in Jackson last fall, you had the opportunity to see Matt's presentation and meet him in person. So Matt, thank you again for making the trip to see us in Wyoming. It was incredibly eye-opening and inspirational because above all else, it just showed us that decarbonizing an entire tourism economy in a major district can actually be done. So we had asked Matt to come back and speak again because many of you obviously weren't able to attend the summit and should really see this information. Because we think it's important that we step out of our US mountain town ecosystem sometimes and see how others are approaching this work. You know, what are the innovative ideas we haven't thought of yet and how are others doing it? And as the outdoor recreation economy continues to grow, so too will our visitor economies. And the pressure to meet our climate goals is going to be that much greater. So we've got to find a way to achieve zero carbon while also welcoming growth. So I'm super excited to see Matt again and hear how everything is going since we saw him last October. So Matt, thanks so much for being here today and for sharing your expertise with all of us. And one last thing, we'll leave some time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions, please just enter them in the Q&A toolbar and we'll get to as many as we possibly can in the time that we have. So Matt, take it away. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Look, I'm just going to go and share screen and then I'll kick off. So let's just see if we can get this all to work. And make sure I don't get muted on the way. Amazing. We're there. Cool.
Right.
So I'm hoping, Chris, everyone can see that first slide saying Kia ora on it.
Yep, we're all set.
Yeah, amazing. Great. Hey, look, so Kia ora, kina koutou katoa, and welcome everybody. It's really exciting to be here and to be able to share what we're doing down here in Queenstown, New Zealand. And look, first of all, I hope everybody can understand me. I know the Kiwi accent can be a little bit funky at times, but I'll do my best and I'll try and speak really slow. It is actually Tuesday morning for us here in New Zealand. It's 9 a.m. So I can tell you how Monday was. It was chaotic. It was busy. It was full of meetings. So if that's what your day's been like, it's exactly how we had it here as well. And it's awesome to be able to represent this presentation that we did in Jackson back in October, November. And I think particularly because the geopolitical situation globally has changed so much and it's so important, the work we're doing. First of all, I thought it's probably worth just discussing who is Destination Queenstown and what we are. We call ourselves a regional tourism office, which I believe in the Northern Hemisphere is often referred to as a DMO, a Destination Marketing and Management Organization. First of all, we are not part of local government. We actually sit outside of local government. And so it's probably just an interesting nuance as I speak through our presentation. So we're actually member funded and sit outside of central government or local government. Anyhow, so whereas New Zealand, look, we're at the bottom of the South Pacific. As we mentioned, we are a day ahead on the other side of the date line. And generally speaking, we're roughly about a 12-hour flight from the West Coast to the US and 15 is a direct flight from New York to Auckland. And then to actually get to Queenstown, we're right at the bottom of the South Island, and we're sort of another 2-hour flight from Auckland down to Queenstown. We happen to be 45 degrees south, which is equivalent to being roughly in Oregon, 45 north, which is kind of interesting because we grow beautiful Pinot grapes, and what do you know, Oregon grows beautiful Pinot grapes as well. So some similarities there. But, you know, we're really here to talk about decarbonisation and how we can do that as a visitor economy. And so one of the things I think is really worth just touching on to start with is actually the elephant in the room, which is often flying around the world. And so I actually used this slide when I went from Queenstown to Jackson Hole. And so we all know that burning fossil fuels is causing climate change. but it's one of those weird things that we measure in tons, 9.66 tons, and we kind of go, well, what does that mean? Is that like 4 pickup trucks or something? And I actually think of this invisible gas more in a volumetric sense, and I think it's an interesting way to measure it. And if I think about my trip to the US, or if you were coming from the US to Queenstown, and I used 40-foot shipping containers, it's equivalent to 63 40-foot shipping containers. And I quite like using the example of a shipping container because we can imagine the size of that. And I guess there's not a small amount, there's an amount of guilt that comes with traveling to the US when I'm using 63 containers of CO2 to get there, and it's been used. But I'm not apologizing for it per se. I'm just saying it's a decision that has been made, and it was one that I made when I went to Jackson to present this. Fortunately, today I'm not using the 9.66 tons or 63 containers of CO2. Anyhow, I thought it's probably worth just telling a little bit about my story and understanding why I'm passionate about this and how I got involved in the regional tourism office here in Queenstown. And so it all starts with coffee. And of course, as I mentioned, it's 9 o'clock here on Tuesday morning, so I'm having a coffee. And prior to working as the CE here at Destination Queenstown, I was working at one of the local ski areas known as Cadrona Alpine Ski Resort, which is a well-known ski area, particularly for park and pipe skiers, and has roughly around about 300,000 skier days a year. So a reasonably busy ski area. On the ski area, I was the head of sales, and one of the roles that I had up there was to oversee the 10 different cafeterias. And the very first year I was on the mountain, the food and beverage team came to me and said, we would like to remove all single-use coffee cups. And actually being the head of sales, I thought that's a great idea because we don't have to buy coffee cups anymore. But what really came from it was a bit more interesting. And so in order to not have single-use coffee cups, you have to come up with a solution. And so the solution was to use a crockery cup or a normal cup. And so ask people to stop, slow down, and actually enjoy that coffee with their friends in the cafe and not actually ask for a takeaway. But what happened from there was actually I realized that we were starting to influence those 300,000 skier days, or roughly 100,000 unique skiers. And those people that would come to the mountain would learn something new and take that behavior change home with them. As well as the team on the mountain, there was roughly 500 staff. They would actually then go back down to the local town of Queenstown and Wanaka and share the idea of not having single-use coffee cups and having keep cups or staying in the cafe. And in Wanaka, we managed to influence the town that we're almost gone single-use cup free, which is just the power that we can use. So I'll refer to the transformative power of tourism or travel and actually how we can create behavior change. The next thing that happened whilst I was at Cadrona in the following year is the team decided that they would get rid of all PET plastic bottles, which is partly the reason I actually came across Mountain Towns 2030, thanks to Jess from Breckenridge, and seeing her amazing work that she's done in the town of Breckenridge by banning all sales of PET plastic bottles, except for I think the 1 gallon. Anyhow, on the mountain, we decided we would get rid of all plastic bottles. And so it's reasonably easy when you think about soda, because you can sell soda in aluminum. But when it came to water, that created a bit more of a challenging question for us. And because, selling water is actually really good business. And when you're the head of sales, you're like, how do I give up all this revenue? So we made the decision that if we were able to grow the yield by 20 cents per person, we would actually make up for the amount of money that we were giving away by not selling water and giving away free water. And in fact, by the end of the year, we'd actually grown our revenue per person on food and beverage by 25 cents. So the idea worked really well for us. And so actually giving away free water, we made more money. And so I often like to discuss that because people sort of say to go green costs you money, or you're losing money, or there's hardship. And I think we need to really demyth the economics of this. And actually there's often huge economic benefits by going green. So the following year, the team actually did something even much more radical. And they decided to actually remove all landfill bins. And so in order to get rid of all the trash on the mountain, we had to make sure that everything we sold was either recyclable or compostable. And we couldn't have a single thing that had to go into the trash. And so then that meant going back to our suppliers and actually asking them, can you make this in a recyclable packaging? Can you make this in a compostable wrapping? Or could you actually sell it to us with no packaging at all? what we'd call a nude product. And so by actually influencing our suppliers, we're able to get rid of all the trash on the mountain or landfill bins. We also discovered that we didn't have enough volume to do some of these things. So we went to our competing ski area and said, would you also do this as well? And so we're able to get the volume to be able to get our suppliers to manufacture some of those products. So the point to these 3 examples is it's a bit of a background to my history before I got involved in the Regional Tourism Office. But what I was able to see during the years that I was working on the mountain, and this is sort of around 2015 to 2021, is the influence that you have on people's behavior change. And if you have 300,000 ski days coming up a mountain, those people love the mountain and they want to care for the mountain, and they learn those new behavior changes and they take them home with them to the town that they live, or they might live in this town as well. So the idea for me was like, well, what if we could influence a whole town? And that's where we sort of come into the Queenstown component. And I'll talk a little bit more about Queenstown Lakes. So here in Queenstown Lakes, we have 3 main lakes. Queenstown has Lake Wakatipu, Wanaka has Lake Wanaka, and Lake Hawea. So this is the area that we look after as a DMO. Roughly speaking, we have about 50,000 people that live in this region and have over 3 million visitors a year. So immediately you can see that we have a very small ratepayer base and a large visitation. And so before COVID, we actually were finding we had a lot of pressures happening here. And so, as I mentioned, roughly 50,000 people, 45% of all our land is in the Department of Conservation land. So that's our government land, like sort of forest land that you'd have in the US. We also have what we refer to iwi, so 7 different runanga. So that's our tribes of the local Māori people here that have claim on our land as well. And then tourism here for us is the big earner. It's roughly about $3 billion a year. And 1/3 of all our population is employed by the visitor sector. And so the challenges for us before COVID, and probably similar to most other mountain towns in the US as well, that we had that real pressure of volume and value. We were really losing that public support for tourism, and we'd call that the loss of social license. We don't call it over-tourism. We still actually have capacity. We still actually have a community that appreciates tourism, but they were pushing back from a social license point of view. We had huge pressure on our environment, and one of those being how do we decarbonize? And we didn't have diversification in our economy. We were heavily reliant on the visitor economy. So one of the interesting things that we measure here in Queenstown Lakes is what we call TAR, Tourism Approval Rating. And so our tourism approval rating is something that we've got here from the last 3 years. And you can see Queenstown in the green line here, where it's dropping from, this is an index from 100, where it's dropping from 68 to 44 approval. And then the grey line is how New Zealand feels about tourism. So New Zealand approves around about 61% of visitors. And then we also measure, this is domestic, we also measure it from international visitors. And so just to clarify, our international visitors, our main market is Australia, which is a 3-hour flight away. Our second biggest market is the US, and then it's China. And so we have actually quite a disapproval rating of international visitors from our local community. So this is hugely concerning for us. And then what we heard from our community, what they'd like to see from the visitor economy is they'd like to see improving infrastructure, which I'm sure you hear in all of your areas. They'd like to encourage visitors to travel outside peak season, which is not uncommon around most mountain towns. But the next 3 were very interesting for us. They'd like to see visitors reducing the impact on the local environment, encouraging visitors to adopt more sustainable practices, and reducing their carbon emissions. So I'm just going to talk quickly about some other metrics of Queenstown Lakes so you get a bit more of an overview of us. And so, as we mentioned, roughly around 50,000 visitors and 50,000 residents with 20,000 visitors a day, or 3 million a year. And we're very fast growing. So in the last 10 years, we've grown 70% in the last 10 years. 41% of all our residents are born overseas. So we're a very multicultural community. So we've got a lot of pressure on growth happening at the moment. And then down here, we have, similar to most other mountain towns, really high housing price. So our average house price sits at about $1.7 million, where in New Zealand it sits at around about $900,000. So probably not uncommon to most mountain towns. However, in the rest of New Zealand, sort of 5% of the population is employed by tourism. Here in Queenstown Lakes, it's roughly 33%. So a huge amount of people working in the visitor economy with high expensive houses. So housing is a real issue for us. This is really interesting for us, that 76% of our district is concerned about the effects of climate change. And it's something that's very talked about in New Zealand. It's sort of what I'd call that barbecue conversation, climate change. And I think it's partly because we can see the impacts of climate change on a daily basis, whether that's a cyclone hitting the country, whether that's forest fires in Los Angeles, or flooding in Europe. So there's a lot of things that people can see. And I think because we're also a very agricultural country, we can see the impact that it's having on crops. And so the left-hand side really just gives you a bit of an overview of our district's emissions. And we look at all of our scope 1, 2, and scope 3 emissions. So you'll see a large amount of international air travel coming in here, then domestic air travel, followed by land transport, and then cooking and energy. So all of this sort of led to, we need to actually come up with a destination management plan, A, to protect this place for future generations, and B, to ensure that we gain our social license from our community. And so the big picture around our destination management plan was really about being a good ancestor. And so the idea of being a good ancestor, I often like to use my daughter as an example here. So I'm 53 years old. My daughter is 15. And if I roll the clock forward to 2100, my daughter will be roughly 90 years old. I'm long gone. She might decide to have children, and those children might have children. So I'd be great-great-granddad. And knowing what I know today, what decisions have I made that have impacted to leave this place better for future generations? So what would those great-great-grandchildren say about great-granddad and the things that he did, now knowing that burning fossil fuels is actually going to cause climate change? So that's one of the ideas of sort of thinking about what does a good ancestor mean. I'm just going to play a quick video to show some of the ambition, and then we'll just get into the destination management plan. So hopefully we get sound on this.
There's no way we can have a regenerative tourism industry without decarbonisation.
I would love to find a way for us to be able to continue to travel and mix and mingle and learn without worrying about the carbon emissions, without worrying that it's destroying the world.
So I think everyone here knows we want people to still come, but we can't keep damaging the planet.
I mean, for Māori, we don't separate the environment, so the environment is part of us.
My youngest at 10's asked me, what am I doing about climate change, given my position? And I want to have an answer.
Here's the tourism industry saying, we want to go carbon zero by 2030.
And we landed on 2030 because that made everybody uncomfortable.
And you could just feel people's brains struggling to comprehend what that might mean.
Everybody felt something. You could see it, right? We got through all the boring stuff in the plan, and then we put up carbon zero by 2030, and everyone in the room paid attention.
It's certainly audacious and it's bold. It's certainly pushing the boundaries.
I think this 2030 goal in tourism is a really prime example of the community pushing an industry into going further, going faster.
I think it's a great goal. I know it's going to be tough and it's audacious, but 100% behind it.
It's captured the imagination of a lot of the business leaders, and I think it'll capture the imagination of our community also.
Come join us. Whether you're a large city or a small town like we are, if we can do it and show it can be done, then learn and do the same.
Even the smallest change, when done by a lot of people, can add up to be big change.
All All right, so I just wanted to show you that video quickly to show the ambition behind the Destination Management Plan and the Keystone Project. And I'm going to come to the Keystone Project very shortly, but before that, I'll just discuss a little bit of how we actually developed the Destination Management Plan. And destination management plans they're not new. I mean, many destinations have them. However, we definitely needed one here in Queenstown Lakes. And I think I'm one of the very few people that uses the word we were fortunate to have COVID. And COVID for us was that time where we closed our borders and they were closed for an extremely long period of time, up to 2.5 years, which made it very tough. It was very lonely down here, particularly in Queenstown. Without our international visitors, which count for a lot of the people that come to visit. And so people often say, imagine if nobody ever came. And that's exactly the scenario that we had. So businesses were really hurting, but at the same time, it gave us that opportunity to almost get off the drug and think about what would it be like if people never came, and actually understanding the benefits of tourism. So at the same time, our community was also going, there's real benefits that we get out of the visitor economy. We get these incredible ski areas. We've got amazing restaurants. It's very multicultural. We have events. We've got arts and culture that we're getting from this. So there was advantages that they could see, but they also didn't want to see tourism be like it was before COVID. So the development of the DMP did take us almost close to 3 years, and partly because of the lockdowns itself and the border closures, it was a very sensitive time where businesses were hurting. And so we had to take it carefully to make sure that we didn't go too fast. And in actual fact, we probably went a little softer at times, and it was our community that made us go faster and go harder and be more ambitious. Anyhow, in the development of the DMP, we went around not just Queenstown and Wanaka, but to our smaller communities as well, and had full-day workshops with our community. And when I say community, I'm referring to the operators that run the businesses as well as the residents, because our operators are residents. And what we did is we asked 3 really simple questions. What do you love about this place? What is your tonga, which is the Māori word for treasure? And what would you like it to look like for future generations? And that started to give us the idea to be able to build our destination management plan. So after roughly 2.5 years, we went out with our draft, which was probably draft number 4. And we had 1,800 people out of the 50,000 people download it and give us feedback, which was quite phenomenal. And the key piece of feedback was, if you truly want to be regenerative, you must decarbonize. Of course, there was more commenting around getting higher value from per visitor, looking after the environment, collaborating, quality of life, the workforce, and other metrics for success there as well. But huge feedback from our community, which gave us that idea to really think about what is going to be our Keystone project to pull out of this. After we finally got that feedback, the plan itself had to go to council to be endorsed because it goes back to central government for funding. If you've spent much time with local governments, which I'm sure everybody on this call has, to get councillors to agree on anything is usually pretty hard. And in this case, we thought we'd get the vote across the line out of the 14 councillors, and we would get 8 of the votes at least. However, we were surprised that we managed to get a unanimous decision, and everybody voted in approval for the destination management plan, which gave us that assurance that we felt that we'd spent a lot of time engaging with our community and really getting what people wanted to get out of the visitor economy. So the vision for the Queenstown Lakes Destination Management Plan is that tourism in Queenstown Lakes is regenerative and resilient, delivering benefits environmentally, socially, culturally, and economically, enriching the lives of the people who live here and the people who visit. And I just want to touch on the word regenerative because it's a word that's not often used, I think, in the Northern Hemisphere, and often refers to maybe farming terms where you give back more than you take. And so that idea is still correct in tourism, but it's about looking at it as a whole system and looking at it across those 4 wellbeing pillars. So super important that we look at it socially, culturally, economically, and environmentally. And of course, if we're not economically successful, the whole thing falls over because we don't have the funding to actually pull it off. But also thinking holistically as the system and thinking about the visitors, the community, and the operators. So everybody together in that. And then the plan itself has 23 actions in it, or 23 pillars, sorry, 23 actions in it and over 3 pillars, which isn't unusual to most plans and actually kind of looks relatively boring, you know. And so the first pillar is around people in place and telling our stories better. Our second pillar is around the environment. And our third pillar is around actually having resilient businesses that can deliver on this. And so we realized that this plan was going to be one of those plans that we'd worked on and probably 5 people know about it and no one else would actually know about it and maybe wouldn't get off the ground. So we decided that one of these projects we needed to pull out and be our keystone project that we could get the whole community to rally around, which happens to be Project 9 sitting under Pillar 2. So Project 9 is around carbon zero by 2030. And so the idea of decarbonising the visitor economy came out loud and clear in our feedback. And so we just looked at the idea of, is this 2050? And we're like, well, no, because if we think about the Paris Accord, it's an epic fail. And as a globe, we're going to miss it. And if we think about 2040, 2040 is too far away and I don't have to do anything on my shift. So the idea of 2030 started to resonate with us because it creates urgency, which is really interesting, the fact that we're talking with Mountain Towns 2030. And if I think about 2030 as of today, that's 2,072 days away, or 2,073 in the US. And so if you start getting quite granular and thinking at it 2,072 days, you think when you wake up in the morning, what am I going to do today to achieve this goal? The other component to this goal was we looked at, is this carbon neutral? Well, carbon neutral doesn't create any behavior change. It's just actually buying offsets, and the whole concept of offsets doesn't work for us. So we didn't want to have a carbon neutral goal. We looked at the idea of being net zero, and we wanted to be more ambitious than net zero, so we could work as hard as we could to abate all of those hard to abate emissions. And then looking at what is left, how do we sequester those in district? And so you could probably go, well, why do you think you can actually achieve this? And so I'm going to give a few examples of what's happening in the district that gave us an idea that we thought we could actually be so ambitious. So first of all, we actually have Ngāi Tahu Tourism. So Ngāi Tahu is the iwi, or the tribe of the South Island. They are a large tourism operator here that operate the very famous Shot Over Jet. They had already decided that they would build the world's first electric jet boat. And they decided to do that because it made sense to be good ancestors for the river. And it didn't make sense to be burning carbon up and down the river. They also realized it was economically cheaper to run an electric jet boat. It gave them a world first because no one else had one, so a huge economic advantage. And it's much quieter for the residents, and so that they don't hear the jet boats ripping up and down the canyon. So this had happened before we'd announced the goal, but gave us that confidence that the district is moving in that direction. The second one is quite an interesting development, is a product called Whoosh, which is a New Zealand gondola-like system that's been developed for Google. And so the idea of this is, how do you actually move people around the district? We're geographically challenged that there is no more space to build roads. So can we use gondola-like systems to actually start moving people as a mass transport system? So the idea with Whoosh, and you can see it in the small caption beside, is it's got steel cables going onto steel girders. So the gondola cabins can actually go around corners. The gondola cabins come down into stations where you can actually dial them up like an Uber and decide to go from station A to station D, bypassing B and C on the way. So this is called Whoosh. It is a world first out in New Zealand. The very first prototype of this, or pilot of this, is actually going to come to Queenstown at Remarkables Park. And then from there can be used around the rest of the world. This particular example has actually been shown in Texas to actually, for a town there that's looking at the same system. So we also had confidence around this as well, because Air New Zealand, our local airline, our national carrier, had made the announcement by 2030 that they would be electrifying their regional aircraft. They've already got their first electric aircraft in play at the moment, but their idea is that the 50-seat type airplanes that are the regional flights will be electrified by 2030. I should probably stop and mention at this point, New Zealand has a highly green electric grid. So you'll see there's a lot of electrification in our decarbonisation plan. New Zealand is roughly 86% renewable, primarily from hydro, with some wind and solar. And down here in Queenstown, we're about 98% renewable, so a highly renewable grid. So that's one of the, I guess, hurdles that most people have to overcome, that we've partly already overcome that already. The other interesting one for us was the TSS Earnslaw. So we have a 112-year-old coal-burning steamship that's actually responsible for 1% of all of the emissions in the district. And so the company that owns this had made the decision to decarbonise it already. They're still going to keep it as a steamship. It just won't use coal as its main source of energy. And if you think about how does steam generate, you just need to heat water. And so there's many ways that you can heat water in a decarbonised way to do that. It'll still be an authentic steamship, it just won't be burning coal. And then New Zealand's quite famous for America's Cup technology with the hydrofoiling sailing boats that you would have seen. And so we've got a few companies that have been developing hydrofoiling electric boats. And so the advantage with hydrofoiling electric boats is we live on a lake, so we can use our lake as a transportation system. So instead of putting more cars and buses on the roads, we can have the gondolas and the boats to use around the lake. The advantage to being a hydrofoiling boat is if it's a choppy day, it's much smoother, and it also uses 90% less energy. So to electrify one of these boats, it's using a lot less energy, so a lot more battery time. So a huge advantage. So we're seeing these boats just coming into play right now. And then we have the Headwaters Lodge up in Glenorchy. The Headwaters Lodge is an amazing lodge that is almost the definition of regenerative. It produces its own electricity and more than it requires and sells it back to the village. It gathers its own rainwater, treats its own grey water, also has the most fanciest self-composting toilets I've ever seen, grows its own vegetables and composts its food waste. It's also been built out of recycled materials out of the Christchurch earthquakes. So probably one of the most sustainable buildings you'll find on the planet, but giving back more than it takes. And then finally, one of our ski areas here, NZ Ski, on the very first year, said that in the first year that they would reduce their emissions by 50%, which blew my mind, thinking that we had by 2030 to do this, and they managed to achieve 51% in their first year. So I just want to talk a little bit now around the type of visitor that we want to actually encourage to come to Queenstown Lakes. And so we talked right at the start around value over volume. And so the idea of value to us didn't really resonate that well. It sounded like a whole bunch of very wealthy people coming to visit. And so we decided to come up with a new definition of people that we want to attract. And so we want to attract what we refer to as high contributing visitors. So these are the visitors that take the time to become a temporary local, getting to know and appreciate our people and place, and forging connections and giving back to the region. So the reason this is really important as a definition is part of actually where we go from our decarbonisation plan. So if you're taking time to become a temporary local, you're staying here longer. So if you have come from the US and you've brought that carbon with you and you stay here for a longer period of time, it's much better than only coming here for 24 hours. And if you're actually able to get to know and appreciate this place and forge connections, together we can actually reciprocally learn from each other. And so people might come here with decarbonisation knowledge that actually gives us that ability to start to diversify this economy as we look at how do we grow new products that have been electrified. So I've got one more final video and then I'll go to some Q&A, and I just thought I'd show you a little bit of how we're marketing Queenstown now. A lot of ski areas market, obviously steep mountains and lots of powder snow. We're now starting to talk about the things that the visitor economy can do to make this place better. So I'm quickly going to show you a video and I'll discuss it and then do some Q&A.
Testing 1, 2. Came with its own tape deck and DJ set. Right, I'm just going to fill up Mr. Chip with some compost. Hi, I'm Michael Sly, and I spend my days composting and my nights distilling wilding pines. The cool thing about waste, when managed correctly, is it's actually an amazing resource. I'm really focusing on the hotel food waste. The cool thing is that when you have, for example, a hotel, is that all that waste comes into one concentrated spot. There's about 20 tonnes a month going into this pile. So when you can take advantage of that concentrated, nutrient-dense food waste, it can become an amazing resource that we can use around the basin for food growing and native plant growing and stuff like that. I like the challenge of seeing really large volumes of what people think are a problem and turning it into something that's positive.
So the point that we're trying to get with the video here is, instead of just talking about amazing mountains and powder snow, we're showing the good that actually tourism can bring from the visitor economy. So the transformative power of tourism. So here in Queenstown, we actually have an issue with pine trees, and you'll probably find that a little surprising. Pine trees aren't native to New Zealand. They're actually bad for our ecosystem, so we have to cut them down. Once we've cut them down, they turn into wood chip, generally speaking, or firewood. And then we're using the food waste from the hotels to make a hot compost with that wood chip, and then using that hot compost to replant native trees. So the point being, stay in one of our hotels, it costs you no more, it's actually cheaper for the hotel to compost, but you're doing good by being a good visitor here. So I will go to some Q&A, so ngā mihi, which is thank you in Māori, and yeah, thank you for your time.
Matt, thank you so much. That was cool to see again. If anybody does have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A toolbar. But Matt, I've got a question for you. What so far has been the biggest challenge that you've faced?
Look, I guess funding. Yeah. And one of the things I was trying to get across is that you would think actually the ambitious goal would be the biggest challenge. That has not been the challenge. The ambitious goal is something that the community has rallied behind and said this is actually our North Star, and everybody talks about it. We recently had another airport company want to come and open an airport here in Queenstown, and the community actually pushed back and said, there is no way, this does not align with our destination management plan, it does not align with our carbon zero 2030 goals, we can't have another airport. So it's good to have the community behind it, and it's their plan, not our plan, but funding is the one thing that slows us down from implementation. However, businesses can see the economic advantage of decarbonisation, and so that's been a real win for us. And they are trying to move as fast as possible to decarbonise through electrification and develop new products, which becomes potentially new diversification or exports for New Zealand. But to get that story to central government in this current economic environment, and look, I've got to be careful because you never know who's listening in the States, do you? But, you know, the influence of the president in the US is influencing all governments around the world. And so there is a lack of appetite for decarbonisation from central government.
Got it. Do you find that tourists come because of what you're doing?
They may not necessarily come, but they discover and learn and share. And so that's telling that story. So I think we will see more people come from that. We're definitely seeing some people come because they're intrigued and interested. So we see a real first mover advantage. However, we are technically really 2 years into it, so it's still early days. And if I think about how we market globally, so domestically, we're finding people coming to learn about this, and they're using Queenstown as a place of learning, which is actually an interesting insight because the early Māori used Queenstown as a place of learning as well. And so if we think about Queenstown, we're roughly 180 miles from the ocean, and New Zealand is very, island-like with lots of ocean. And so they would come to Queenstown in the summer months in the search of greenstone or the panamu, and they would use the greenstone for jewellery and for tools like axes. But at the same time, the 7 different runanga, which is the sub-tribes of the iwi, would come here and share their knowledge before they go back to the coast. And so 800 years ago, this was a place of learning. So if we can use Queenstown as a place of learning and use the visitor economy to help do that, that's encouraging. And particularly if you think about conference and incentives and how we bring conferences to places and how do we use Queenstown as a place of learning and sharing this knowledge.
Absolutely. And I love, before we get to questions, just one more thing. I love the fact that you are so intertwined with the Indigenous culture. More, and we need to learn from that as we go forward as well.
Yeah, we could probably still do better. However, we were maybe fortunate to be one of the last countries to be discovered that we were able to look, I mean, Europeans have only been in New Zealand for 200 years. And so they were able to look around the world and see what had been done well and what had not been done well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let me get some questions. The first one, what is your largest completed reduction project to date?
The largest project would probably be what we call the Optimal Visitation Project, which is a creative way of saying what is the amount of people that we can really bring here? What is the impact of those people? And what's the most effective way to actually reduce carbon with those people? So if we think about a visitor that lives close, they are going to bring less carbon than someone coming long haul. And we're not saying that long haul is not welcome. We're saying long haul is welcome, but they need to stay longer. So our Optimal Visitation Project isn't just a capacity project. It's about understanding the visitor mix, so where people are coming from, how long they stay, and what is their impact on the environment, biodiversity, and the carbon that they bring with them and use. So that's probably our biggest project.
Great, thank you. This question from Emily, is the workforce seasonal or year-round? And how is the day-to-day workforce engaged in these initiatives?
Yeah, I'd say, so first of all, it is, well, we're a year-round destination. So we are the Southern Hemisphere's premium four-season destination. However, it is very distinctive seasons, all four of them. So right now we're in fall, and it's gorgeous with all the leaves falling off the trees and those magnificent colours. Winter, the ski season for us starts the 14th of June, and it's a cold winter, and then we move into a beautiful spring and a warm summer. Point being, very different offerings to different people. So the ski season is a different workforce to what we're going to see in the summer season, and we see a lot of trans-seasonal workers coming from the Northern Hemisphere to New Zealand to work here and vice versa. I would say the answer to is the workforce behind this. This is very much the community's plan, and the workforce is the community. So I'd call this a ground-up plan. And that example that I was giving from Cadrona, the ski area of the 500 staff, and I was working there, that was the staff's plan. That was not the management's plan. That was the staff being so ambitious and pushing management, and management going, that's a brilliant idea. We should do that. It's going to save us money, and it's the right thing to do.
Great, thank you. From Lindsay, what is the plan for addressing the international flight emissions? Do you have landing departure taxes that provide funding for your other initiatives?
No. Yeah. So there's no silver bullet to aviation. I think we've got to be correct about that first and foremost. What we do know is there is electric flights. So electrification is coming, but that will only be regional. It's only going to be good for 2-hour flights at maximum. And then we also have hydrogen electric flights. And so we're starting to see that technology start to kick in. So hydrogen electric is using hydrogen to produce the electricity to a fuel cell. Those planes are actually, they're not commercial, but they've been developed, and they're good for 200 nautical miles, which is roughly 3 hours in New Zealand, Australia. So that would be the next cab off the rank. That could be a decarbonised route. Long haul, that doesn't even exist at the moment. It's not even on the horizon. And so long haul, there is the ability to look at SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, but not necessarily 100% SAF, looking at a blend. And so it's about thinking long haul flights will have flights that could be using SAF on the most economical plane. So therefore, if you're using 100% of emission today, could you get it to more like a 70% emission? And so you're doing better by that. And I think where we're looking from a government point of view is that creates an opportunity to develop SAF in New Zealand. And so SAF is made out of or plant or animal waste. In New Zealand, we actually have a lot of plant waste which comes from forestry. So one of our issues we had with the cyclone was slash, which is the wood slash left behind from forestry. You can make SAF from slash. And also talon, which is food waste, from animal waste, is used to make SAF at the moment. We export it from New Zealand to Singapore to make SAF. So it's kind of weird that we don't make sustainable aviation fuel. So once again, there's a diversification option here. However, understanding that international aviation is still going to have hard to abate emissions, then we have to look at how do we just sequester that carbon in district in the year that it's generated. And that's what we're looking at. So you planting natives in district the year it's generated.
Great, thank you. Just two more from Kirsten about composting. Can you talk about your process to implement composting in your region? How long ago did you start officially? Are you able to measure how many residents / households are actually composting? And what are your biggest hurdles to your composting program?
Great question. So I think this probably leads into the circle of influence that I have, which is around the visitor economy. So residents, I can't necessarily directly influence. I can tell stories to hopefully influence them, as opposed to our hotel operators and other restaurants I can truly influence. So the composting's been going for roughly about 3 years, but it is on the commercial sense. So it's the hotels. However, if a resident wanted to drop their compost off to one of the hotels and the hotel wanted to take it, that would be fine. And it came about because of this wood chip that we had. And so the advantage that came out of this is it was costing the hotels and restaurants money to take their food waste to landfill. It is cheaper for them to go to compost. So huge economic advantage which came out of it. But unfortunately, we don't have residential composting for what people are doing themselves.
Got it. Thank you. Last question. Aside from the gondola and boat transport, are there any other alternative modes being explored?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you think about moving people around and behavior change, the first thing is staying close to where you are so you can walk and ride bikes. So I think actually thinking about walking particularly and riding bikes is a key example. I think when you talk about decarbonisation, everyone thinks about electric cars and electric buses. Our problem is geographically we have no more space to build roads. So we're thinking about innovative solutions. It could be light rail, too expensive. So that's where the gondola ideas come in. A gondola is considerably cheaper than light rail, faster to install, and actually can move the volume of people that we require roughly at about sort of 4,000 people an hour. So from the airport to town would be a great example, which is roughly 5 miles. So that's why we have been looking at gondolas. And then, of course, the lake is untapped. So it's definitely the option for us to use that as a main highway. And if we go back to the early Māori, they had no roads here. They used canoes, which are known as wakas, to get around the lake. So starting to use some of that understanding. But light rail had been considered. Bus is still an option, but it's just adding to the problem of congestion. You know, if you're sitting in a bus, you are the problem.
Yep. One last one from Mia, actually 2 more. I'm curious what your approach is to integrating nature into your work and hoping to hear how this approach originated in integrating nature-based solutions.
I think around decarbonisation primarily, is that the question for me?
Yes.
Yeah. So the reason we've picked the decarbonisation as our keystone project is we believe it touches just about every other one of the 23 projects. So for us, planting native bush here is really important. We want to rebuild our biodiversity. So we have a lot of pines, as I mentioned. They were introduced species from California because they grow super well here in New Zealand. However, they are not good for our biodiversity. They drain too much water and they're not good for our bird life. So planting natives it's a longer play, but we want to use massive, large-scale replanting as part of our sequestering carbon. So at the moment, we have the front face of Coronet Peak, one of our ski areas, where we're planting 1 million native trees right now, the largest forest restoring project in New Zealand currently. But using it, from a biodiversity point of view, but also it can be used to sequester that carbon.
Thank you.
We definitely look at other solutions like carbon removal, but at the moment that technology is not at a commercial level. So we encourage that innovation and development, but we're not putting that into our plan.
Great. And I'm sure this is on the minds of pretty much everybody in the mountain towns. How do you influence visitors to become high contributing visitors? Are you explicit in explaining your goals, or is it more of a subtle learning experience for them?
Yeah, look, that's partly why I wanted to show that video at the end around the composting, because that's around how do we attract people. People talk about having the right people come to visit, and you can't actually have someone at the gate saying, hey, you're the right person, you can come, you're the wrong person, you can't come. All you can do is influence people to come. And when they do come, what behaviors would you like to show them when they turn up? So that's why our marketing shows a lot of this type of behavior that we're looking at. But equally, it's a lot to do with our member capability. And so if we can upskill our members, and we spend a lot of time, we have 1,000 members of hotels, restaurants, retail, and experiences. So if we can spend time member capability building and upskilling our members around those behaviors, they show those behaviors to their guests, and so the guests learn from the operators.
Got it. Awesome. Well, I think we're coming up on the hour. So if there are any more questions, please let us know right now. But otherwise, Matt, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Again, it was really great to see you again. Hopefully we'll see you again soon in person.
Look, if anyone wants to reach out, Chris, by all means, give them my email, or you'll find me on LinkedIn. My Matt is spelled with 1 T. I know that's unusual, but you'll find me pretty easily with 1 T Woods. Yeah.
Great. I will share that with everybody. Thank you.
Cool.
And for everyone that was here today, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found some value in it. We are going to be talking next month about green banks and project financing. Obviously, with the Inflation Reduction Act being in jeopardy, A lot of projects are up in the air, and we want to help you figure out, navigate your way through some project financing situations. So stay tuned for an invitation to that one, May 28th. But in the meantime, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. We'll see you soon.